Montage commercials are all about consistency. It's your job as a cinematographer to create visual flow through a series of shots and scenes. This can be done through lighting, camera movements, and so many other cinematography techniques. But there's one approach that I started using that made shooting montage commercials so much easier. In this video, I'm going to show you exactly how you can do that by breaking down a 4-day montage commercial where we shot a total of 22 scenes. What makes a montage commercial good? Cinematography, direction, set design, or the editing? It's actually all of those, but the most important thing is consistency. When it comes to creating a montage commercial, consistency across scenes is one of the most important aspects a cinematographer needs to focus on. It's not just about capturing different shots. It's making sure that each shot feels like it's part of a bigger picture. Whether it's the lighting, color tones, or framing, every shot needs to flow together seamlessly. If one scene feels out of place, it can disrupt the entire commercial. Consistency helps you build a cohesive story, allowing the audience to stay engaged without being distracted by jarring changes in style or tone. Let's dive into some scenes so I can show you how you can create consistency in your work. The commercial that we're going to be looking at today was a montage commercial for a real estate company. So they are basically building a new building, and it's our job as a production company, my job as a cinematographer, to show off a bunch of amenities in different spaces of their old properties and make sure that this feels like it is being sold properly by selling this experience. And this scene that we're looking at here is a young group of friends that are meeting up for a dinner on a rooftop patio. This is one of the amenities of the actual space. This was shot on the Sony Venice in combination with the Sony FX3. So this is my go-to combo for all the commercials I shoot on, just because how versatile it is, the image I can get out of it, and what this can be reproduced with the colorist. And then all of the shots that you see on this commercial are shot with the DZO Artless Primes, which we had access to, and these are amazing lenses. I can talk very highly of these lenses because I've used a variety of things, and these really stack up to the higher price point lenses, and I had a really good time using them. So when we talk about consistency in this project, and me as a cinematographer, I am trying to tell a visual story, but I am trying to do that with all these different stories that are kind of intertwining, but tell that in the same way. And what you can do that is with composition, shot variety, and just basically coverage. And this is the essence of shooting a montage commercial. You don't want your visual language not to be understood, and shoot basically all your scenes in different styles. And you can see here with the shot that we're starting off with is the establishing. We're gonna be going through basically 3 scenes here, and you can see how exactly I shot these the same each time. So we started off with a 14mm lens here, and then we are actually using some filtration, and in front of this we had an 1/8 HPM. So this is a Hollywood Blackmagic. I don't really like to go above an 1/8. I usually like to keep my filtration very subtle to give me a good looking image out of camera, so that when we're on set, we can see what that looks like. We can push it more in the coloring process and also push it more in post. But what I am doing here is getting an establishing shot with no movement, but high up in the corner. We started doing this a lot in our work. So if I kind of draw the top down of what's going on here, I have my main scene happening here. This was actually a gym. We were trying to make it look like a rooftop, so there's not a lot going on there. So we kind of just turned off the lights in the space what we could, so it was dark, so you couldn't see inside. And then we were building up on the reflections, which really help and sell this. I didn't really have a circular polarizer. A lot of people would say, why wouldn't you have a CP on this so you can see the rest of the things? I was trying to hide things, and that is the essence of filmmaking. So we have our camera basically stationed up on it right here. And then I have this on a set of Mitchell sticks, and these are the tall sticks. So they're 2 stages of tripod legs, and then they go up really high. This is me just basically establishing my composition. And generally I kept the action, I did multiple options with this, happening in the center of frame. So if I were to draw just a grid, I'm not necessarily using the rule of thirds when it comes to the main action where I want everybody to focus, which is in the center. But I do have things happening on the edges of frame to fill out everything, because every time that we would set up the shot, we had like, okay, we did this in the last scene where the movement was on the right and there was something happening on the left and the main action was in the center. So this is exactly what we did, because we have people walking in and greeting each other, and then we have the main action and happening here in the front, and then we can focus on everything on the background, which is the CN Tower, to kind of give us a location that's happening around the background. Now going into the sequence and talking about how the scene is playing up, the friends come into the frame, they greet each other, and now they're sitting enjoying dinner, and we want a passage of time. So I'm not going to shoot that action of them sitting down with this next shot. With montage commercials, you want to really speed up time and not necessarily sit on action. So the dinner is already served, everybody is already having their appetizers and everything, and it's just a very casual thing. So that just goes on with like the direction and then aligning with your director on that. But when we talk about the next shot of how this was actually done, this was shot on the Venice, and then at this point I'm on a lower pair of sticks, and this was a 21 millimeter. I really like to do the shot when going in and moving in. Generally, what we did is we basically upped our focal lengths as we were going. So we got all the coverage from the 14 millimeter, which was just up in the corner. And then we shot all these certain kind of medium wide shots with a 21. And then we just jumped to a 40 millimeter, which you'll see later. And then something very tight, such as a 135, 90, or something in that range where it's supposed to be telephoto. So this is the consistent scene coverage that we did. We basically did a wide, a medium, and tight, which you're gonna see later. So this is just me sitting at the corner of the table with the camera, and we are not using any lighting here. We just have the practicals in the background to simulate, that they planned this because this is gonna go into the evening and that they're gonna need light eventually. So we're trying to make it nice and intimate. And then if we just look at this as a composition, we are focusing on what's in the middle of the table, which is the enjoyment, but we have multiple actions playing out on both sides of the frame. And this is just very visually pleasing. I don't see any really dead space where I'm like, something could be there. So this is what I just generally look for when I'm trying to fill out a frame. And even in situations, she was leaned back, the talent here, with her arm, and it didn't necessarily feel right because this guy is having a conversation over here, but it looks like he's talking to nothing. So what we just did is have her awkwardly lean into the camera, which looks really weird behind the scenes, but it looked very natural when you just see that arm. And obviously, he's talking to somebody over here. But if that arm wasn't there, he would be talking to nobody. And then even having conversations, not necessarily across the table, but conversations in different places. And this just really helped fill out the frame. So this is a combination of you and your director going back and forth. And I'm like, something is really missing in that corner because it feels too dead. And then he's like, okay, we can easily do that with blocking and then just our talent. So that is just filling out your frame properly. And then when we go to the third shot in the sequence, this is actually me going in for the tight of the shots and shooting over shoulders. And this is when we actually had to start lighting everything because this, again, passage of time, we wanted the sun to start setting. And then this was just heavily done in the pre-production process. We planned here to be basically here when the sky was about to set because the sun is off here in the background. And then as we go on, the sky starts to change and then we get those nice colors, and then eventually we get to a shot where the sun starts setting, and this was kind of used as the final shot in the piece. And this was what we wanted to do and end on this high note. We wanted to go from early morning to day to a dusk feeling when the sun is actually setting. So that is how we achieved that. And then this is when I had to actually start moving in lights because the sun was setting, and then I was dealing with heavy contrast ratios just because of how harsh the sun was. So if we again draw our table that we were looking at before, this is me shooting over the shoulder of somebody else. The shoulder is not in frame, but I'm just shooting over the table. And then my talent is there. We're still working with the Sony Venice. And then at this point, I am handheld and I'm just moving around the table with a long lens. At this point, we're shooting on the 135 millimeter because we didn't want a 180 because that would be way too much. We just wanted to basically chop off the top of the head and then the mid body and get a lot more context and not necessarily a very tight shot. So this is just me shooting in this direction. And then I have my son basically backlighting my subject, which is giving me a nice highlight on the hair. And it's basically giving me a very nice flare. And it's very interesting. But what happens here is you get a very heavy contrast ratio, meaning that you don't have a lot of ambient and a light on the face, especially on the light side of her face. So this would be completely dark. And I had my gaffer and grip. They were running kind of two Titan tubes to sandwich the talent, and then I would just tell them, we just need different outputs, so we'll put them on different sides. And I just had one of them stand off here to the side, and this was set at 2700 Kelvin. And because we were pretty late in the day, we didn't need that much power. So we're roughly sitting around 40%, and this would vary depending on the shot. But this is basically adding that warmth back into her face, adding the light side back here so we can have some sort of a sandwich. We have a harsh sunset coming in here, which is giving her a beautiful hair light as well as flaring the lens. So we had something to look at. You could shoot this no problem without the tube, but I just liked it there because it added more detail to the face. And I had to go with what we were shooting. We were more so focused on the feeling, and this was supposed to feel more commercial. If this was supposed to feel a little natural, a little more verite in telling a story, I wouldn't have that. It would be very contrast heavy and possibly even bring in a neg. But you can see if we just take off this graphic here and talk about scene coverage, I have a wide, super wide in this case, and then I have a medium wide, and then we just go into tights. As a cinematographer, I've kind of learned that I don't like shooting in focal lengths in the mid-range. I really don't like shooting on 50s, 35s, or kind of 50 to 75. I really like super wide lenses or super tight lenses. And this is what I've just developed in my work, and it comes very interesting. When I started like my videography as well as just cinematography and kind of bridging that gap, I love to shoot on the 35 and 55 millimeter Sigma lenses that I had. And it just kind of felt very stale. I didn't really know how to use a wide lens properly. And I'm not saying I know how to use a wide lens properly in this, but this gives me a little bit more interest and tells a different story. But the main thing that we're going to be looking at here as we dive into the next scene is keeping that consistency across your scenes and images. What we're moving into here is a birthday scene, and you can see if we just break down the shots that we're going to be looking at before we even dive into how we lit them and how we use the natural room to achieve this, we are starting off with a wide medium, and then a tight shot to play out the action. And you could see the visual consistency across this. So if I even go back to the next scene, it is the same visual language, and this is super important when you're shooting montage commercials, especially as a cinematographer, to have that in mind. So this, again, we shot on the Sony Venice, but there was a lot of interesting things that we had to do here because this was dealing with a interesting location and how you position a camera that is that heavy over this. I know that we're talking about visual language and consistency, but it's really important how to understand and how to achieve certain shots like this. But we were dealing with a room that had a lot of windows and not necessarily a lot of places to put white lights. I generally like to preach light for your wide and then start moving in for your tights. But in a situation where you're dealing with a montage commercial where you have about maybe 6 to 8 locations in a day that you don't necessarily have the manpower or just will to set up anything because you rather get shots than start lighting everything perfectly. You can't really set up lights, so you have to use the fundamentals of cinematography and just know when to shape light, know when to shoot certain things, and just basically timing all your shots. So I was dealing with a room that had a lot of natural light. Our action is happening here and our camera is sitting here. But we couldn't simply just put our camera on the stairwell. I wanted it kind of high up enough and then almost sitting over the railing, because just due to the stairwell, if I tried to put it as close to the step, the tripod wouldn't fit. So what we had to do is bias the camera on a Mitchell offset plate. So this is what we got from a rental house. So it's basically our tripod sits here, and then we put sandbags on the back to counterweight it. And then we have our tripod head and our camera sit off here. So I can get this as close to the railing that I want without dealing with putting my tripod legs in a compromising place where it's gonna fall down the stairs. So you have to do this very carefully, and I encourage you to hire the right people to do this, or just get information from people online how to do this. This is something that I just learned myself. I didn't necessarily have a pre-production call with a grip to say what I need. I just did my research, and just based off of previous experiences, I know exactly what offset I needed to get basically the shots I wanted. But what I'm doing here is I'm prioritizing my composition when I know that I don't have access to lighting. So we are dealing with the sun at this point, which is somewhere over here, and it's covered by all the buildings because we're in a downtown area. And basically I have a lot of light coming in, bouncing, reflecting off buildings, and basically giving me a big bounce source. So what I am going to do here, and what my weapon as a cinematographer or something in my toolbox, is negative fill. And you can actually see some of that negative fill in the shot. If I didn't point it out to you, you wouldn't necessarily know, but we just hung a bunch of duvetine off the side of the railing that was there. So I didn't have access to like a 20 by 20 or a 20 by 40 duvetine because those are ridiculous to move around as well as rent. We were dealing with a very small kit. So I had them hang a 12 by 12, an 8 by 8, and I believe a 10 by 10, and we just pony clamped it together. And then also just flew up some floppies on a stand to give me as much as black space. So this wall wasn't reflecting anything back to here. And it just gives me enough contrast, enough interest back into this side of the room so it doesn't feel as bright as that. We are not looking at necessarily the faces, because if I were going over here, I'm like, oh, this seems kind of flat. I am looking at generally the room and where all that light is coming from. And then you can actually see it on this gentleman's face, the contrast coming back in here, her face, even how he has his body turned here. This is all because of this big negative fill that we're hanging there. And then any room that I go into that has white walls or that I'm dealing with that I don't necessarily have time to light, my favorite tool to use, and I will live and die by this, is bringing black material on set. I rather have that when I know that I'm shooting in a sunny location or that I have access to windows. I rather have duvetine or any black material, it could be a black bed sheet, rather than having the most powerful lights. This is just something that I've learned to adapt and just learned to shoot. So now if we talk about kind of the direction, what's happening is basically the grandmother in the scene is presenting our cake to our birthday girl here, and she's placing it down. And this is, again, talking about consistency and, more importantly, scene coverage. So now that we've established that movement, we're going to shoot it multiple times at different camera angles that are the same that we kind of shot for the other scenes, but play out the different scenarios that are happening. So the cinematography and the visual tone stays the same, but the direction, blocking, and what's happening in the scenes is staying different. That is the essence of a montage commercial, especially when you're dealing with multiple actors that have to do different things. You're not gonna tell the actor to do the same thing that the other actors were doing. You're gonna tell the cinematographer or the crew or whoever's working on that to maintain a visual style. And that is the definition when it comes to consistency and what we're talking about in this project. So now we move into the second shot, which is the table shot that we're working with here. Now, if we go back to the previous shot, which was the second one in the sequence, we are dealing with a little bit higher camera angle. And this is where you don't have to necessarily, pull up the last frame on the monitor and start framing it up the same. That will be a little bit too consistent, a little bit too match cutty. So this was me kind of changing it up and playing towards what the scene is talking about and kind of what I'm dealing with too in the scene as well. I'm dealing with talent that is a little bit shorter. I have to reveal the actual story that is happening in the background with the grandpa here. It's the same but different. So you don't have to be a stickler and try to match frames exactly. We're not trying to pull off one for ones here or match cuts. If we talk about the blocking, the grandma just set down the cake here, and then she just blew out her candles, as you can see here, and then she's smiling. So that just goes on to the actor blocking. But if we talk about where we are positioned and what we're dealing with, and then I am just sitting on the corner of the table on a tripod, and then I have all that negative fill still behind me. But at this point, I had my grips walk in 2 sets of floppies and kind of table them off. So I would have some more contrast, as you can see back into her face here. We're going for a commercial look. I'm not going for anything with heavy contrast. Maybe if the sun was coming in here and giving a little bit more orange tones and everything, we would have that. But I'm just dealing with that natural light that's coming in. And then even if we go back to the wide, you will notice that one of the windows has shears here. This was done by the art team, and we didn't have enough shears for the room. So we were just like, how does this make sense? Oh, we kind of want the happy birthday to be seen, and we can say that, because they were setting this up, they only put it on that one. It necessarily doesn't work for the wide. If you talk about, having consistency and having shears across the whole thing, that would be a lot better. But it really works for this shot because now I'm dealing with a soft light source and something that, again, we have all those buildings in the back bouncing all that light around, but now it's going through this diffusion and just giving me the light that I'm looking as a commercial cinematographer. It's giving me very pleasing highlights, not harsh shadows at all. The fall off is amazing when we look at the light side to the shadow side. And then when we look at our talent here, we have a massive source, which you can see in the catch light here. So it just gives me so many levels of interest, and that's what you're doing to build as a cinematographer. And then when I was even looking at the table and looking at all the details while we were setting up and retaking the shot so many times, we were even dealing with some nice reflections here that just add for more of a cinematography standpoint, not necessarily the story, but that's what you can play with different camera angles and such like that. And then if we talk about composition, the rule of thirds, our center action as she blows out the candles is right here, but we're dealing with interest on the right third. And then on the left third, we're filling it up with a happy birthday with all the other people. And then just a shoulder in here. This is actually somebody from the art department, and we just wanted to fill up the frame entirely to make it even feel better. When you're dealing with a lot of actors and a lot of moving parts going on, the previous scene before this was kind of freestyle, like, hey guys, just have a conversation. You talk to this person, you talk to this person. But when you're directing kids, that's very difficult to do. So we needed a kind of action for them to react to. And that was, again, the grandma walking towards everybody singing happy birthday. And then we have our talent blow out her candles. So this is, again, just very important for you to know, especially when you're dealing with a lot of people. You don't want to necessarily tell all these kids, okay, have a conversation. You have to kind of judge that based off of what's going on. And then it's very hard to deal with a lot of people like that. So now we are dealing with something that is more naturalistic, but this is when you come into the tight shots, you can see really how we started shaping that light with all that negative fill on the right side here, as well as my gaffer and grip just walking in those floppies. So we have a nice solid gradient here. And then the color temperature mix of just all the daylight that's coming in, and then the warmth from the candles really play up on this. And this is just using the story to really drive the cinematography. We get the nice catch light in her eyes, and then we get the warmth in the center, and then that falls off to the nice daylight that's in the background. So again, we shot this with a super wide angle, perched up in a very similar angle to what we did before. And then we go in for a medium. This wasn't necessarily on the 21 where I was super wide because I was dealing with people who were a lot farther away and the table was kind of different. So we shot this on a 25 instead. And then we moved into the super tights. Again, this was on the 135, and just to keep that consistency. The next thing that we're going to be talking about is plays up on the group of friends that are coming into that room. So again, if we talk about visual language, again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but we are starting with a wide, going in for the medium, and then going for the possibly tight. This was kind of different because we were playing up on the action, and then you have to ask yourself when you're talking to your director and cinematographer, what do you want this to feel like? I don't necessarily want to be close up and in their face. This is more of a watching aspect. We want the actions to play out and the camera to be kind of a fly on the wall. So this is very similar to the birthday scene where we were that fly on the wall and really watching everything play out. So we have our kind of two guests here coming in, and then they're meeting up with their friends, but they're late. So they're kind of trying to stop from blocking the screen. And then we have a basketball game going on here. This is just what we were dealing with and what we're able to show on the screen, not necessarily watching a movie, just because they have a partnership with the Raptors, which is the local Toronto basketball team here. So we have that action going in, and then we have to basically cover this scene. So when we talk about this wide, we are shooting on the 14 millimeter here, and this is just on a taller tripod sticks, the tall sticks. And then I just have this fully extended and I'm up in the corner. So if we draw out this room, this is where camera is, and then I'm just pointed off down into the corner. What was interesting here is the lighting that was associated with. I wanted to take advantage of this ledge that was spread out through across there and really add some color contrast into this image. I knew that this screen was be playing and this was levels enough, and we could easily bring this down in post as well as play anything on that. And this was going to give me enough light because I'm basically dealing with a massive bounce source. The projector is projecting that image, bouncing it back, and it was giving me enough levels. And with a dual base ISO, as well as just playing with the aperture, I knew that I had enough levels. And I did that in the tech and location scout. But I wanted to add some visual interest back up into here. And then if you look close enough, you can see some gaps in these lighting, which wouldn't be a continuous LED strip. What we did is we had a bunch of Titan tubes. So we have 3 here, and then we have 5 over here. And these were set to like 2%, super low, because I was at the second base ISO of the camera, which is 2500, and I was wide open on this with no NDs. The lights were set to 3200 Kelvin, and my camera's white balance was set to 4400. This just pushes everything that is natural to a little bit more blue tone, which you can kind of see here, and you can see how blue the screen is. But then these just push it to almost a very off-white, a very nice orange that is not too distracting. I didn't want to go to a full teal and orange where you have this like 2700 color Kelvin or an orange color. I just wanted a very nice accent lighting, which doesn't really make sense in a movie theater, but this makes sense as a cinematographer for somebody who is actually viewing this, because this would be pitch black and you would just see the screen. So when we go into the rest of the scene coverage and we're talking about consistency, this is something I had to do a little different. And this is the importance of not really adhering to, I have to say 100% consistent. I have to shoot the next shot on a 21. It has to be kind of wide medium. No, it kind of plays up with multiple scenes that you're dealing with and what you can cut across. You can have consistency across your whole piece with this visual language, and you can have consistency in between scenes so you can cut between them, no problem. But with this, again, we had this watching feeling. And the next shot that we're going to be talking about is two screens that I'm going to show you, but they're the same shot playing out. And it is basically the coverage of them walking in and then me watching that and panning across the room to show their reaction to their reaction of continuously watching the movie and pretty much ignoring them, right? That was kind of the multiple blocking that we were dealing with. So when we talk about scene coverage and consistency, we were talking about shooting this very much the same way. And that's what we actually tried to do, but this did not feel good. We were shooting with a 21, shooting kind of that medium wide that we did before. And we're like, something's kind of different here. We don't want to be necessarily in the action. We want to be watching this. So we did shoot it consistently, but we went with what felt the best, which was stepping back in the corner, having the more watching feeling, and then shooting that on a very long lens to give you that feeling as well. When we shot the wide here, this was on the 14mm, and then we have the female talent there, and then we have the male talent here, and then they were coming in here. We have the camera in the corner now, and we shot this on a 75mm. Just to give us some room to work with, we're shooting on the Venice, which is 6K, so I know I can punch in easily, but we're shooting on the 75 because we didn't know if we wanted the super tight or kind of medium, and we didn't have time to really shoot it twice. But this felt necessarily the best. So this is just me panning the camera from camera right to camera left and following the action. And this is another thing that we did in some of these scenes as well, is let the action tell the story and let the camera follow that. So basically they're coming in here, that's me following their action, and then I land on the female talent, and it's just an easy way to do that. So I had this massive plan to actually have a 12x12 solid here, and then a Nova 600 with a TV effect, and bounce that off here to give us the effect that they're actually watching something. But when we went to the wide and then we saw what was actually happening, and then I kind of just positioned my camera for the tight and then had my crew start actually setting stuff up, we didn't need any of that. This was all just the projector. And then this gives me a massive catch light in the eyes and very naturalistic of what's going on here. I'm not necessarily looking to give me the most cinematic of having high contrast ratio, of bringing in the flag and developing more contrast on the shadow side of the face where the camera is. I am telling the story here of this light coming in and basically hitting the front of their faces and really telling that story. You have to go necessarily, in this case, for realism rather than of what is considered cinematic or what a cinematographer wants. If I really wanted to do this, I would probably have another light source here, which could be a little bit warmer and really give me some nice interest as well as levels into the back, and then possibly have even more contrast here. We are telling a natural story, and this felt very natural, and we didn't have to add any more lights. We actually had to take down the Titan tubes as well, just so we could speed things up. So when we talk about consistency and implementing this into your work specifically, it's all about aligning with what your visual language is. And this is not, I'm not gonna say, oh, you have to align with your director. You have to align with yourself if you're the director, as well as director of photography, videographer, cinematographer. It's the same thing as if you had a client and they're trying to tell their brand story. You have to align with them with what they want and their visual language. You have to align with yourself and the visual language as well. Once you start seeing how you can shoot multiple scenes consistently in this visual language, you will see how easy the editing process is. You will see how everything kind of comes together, because when you start shooting these things individually, you're like, where does this really fit? And with that visual language, with that alignment and all this planning, everything kind of comes into place.